February 1945. World War II is still raging in Europe. American soldiers are dying on the front lines. And in the cold, rat-infested warehouses of Birmingham, England, 855 women are about to do what the US military said was impossible. They're going to clear 17 million pieces of mail. This isn't a movie. It's the true story of the 6888. The only predominantly black female battalion to serve overseas during World War II. And for 75 years, their story was buried. Let me take you inside. The mail crisis in Europe was catastrophic. By 1945, over 7 million American service members, Red Cross workers, and government personnel were scattered across the European theater. And the mail system had collapsed. Letters and packages were stacked to the ceilings in warehouses. Some of them were dated as far back as 3 years. Soldiers fighting on the front lines hadn't heard from their families in months. The Army's official position? The mission is impossible. It would take at least 6 months just to make a dent. Enter the Women's Army Corps. In November 1944, the U.S. War Department lifted its ban on black women serving in the Women's Army Corps. The result was a new unit, the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. 855 women. 824 enlisted personnel and 31 officers. And their commanding officer was a woman named Charity Adams. She would become the highest-ranking black woman officer in the U.S. Army during World War II. But before they could sort mail, they had to survive. They trained at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. They learned to identify enemy aircraft and ships. They climbed ropes, jumped trenches, and crawled under logs wearing gas masks. They boarded and evacuated ships. They marched long distances with heavy rucksacks. These women weren't being trained for a desk job. They were being trained for war. In February 1945, the first contingent of the 6888 embarked from New York aboard the Isle de France. The ship survived close encounters with German U-boats during the crossing. When they arrived in Glasgow, Scotland, a German V-1 rocket exploded near the dock. They hadn't even reached England yet, and they were already under fire. The battalion took a train to Birmingham. They were housed in abandoned school buildings with blacked-out windows to protect against nighttime air raids. And when they arrived at their work site, they were met with a nightmare. 6 airplane hangars. Each one packed to the ceiling with undelivered mail. Christmas presents from the Battle of the Bulge that had been returned. Letters that had been bounced from unit to unit across a shifting front line. Packages that had rotted in the damp, unheated hangars. Rats were everywhere. But the women of the 6888 had a motto: no mail, low morale. They understood something that the Army leadership didn't. The mail wasn't just paper and boxes. It was the only connection soldiers had to their families, to their wives, to their children, to the world they were fighting to protect. So they got to work. They worked 7 days a week in 3 8-hour shifts. They processed an average of 65,000 pieces of mail per shift. They developed a new card index system that recorded over 7 million names. They tracked down soldiers by serial numbers when addresses were wrong. They worked through air raids, through exhaustion, through everything. The Army gave them 6 months. They cleared the entire backlog in 17 million letters. Sorted. Processed. Delivered. And then they did it again. The battalion was sent to Rouen, France. Another backlog. Another impossible deadline. And again, the 6888 finished in 3 months. Later, they were sent to Paris to continue their work. But their success came at a cost. The women faced constant discrimination. White male soldiers assumed they were sent to Europe for their companionship, a notion the battalion quickly set straight. The Red Cross refused them entry to their club, instead opening a segregated facility. The 6888 never stepped foot in it. Some of the battalion's basketball players were invited to play on an Army all-star team. Then the invitation was rescinded when the Army learned they were black. Mixing races was against Army policy, even for sports. And then there was the funeral. 3 members of the 6888 died in a Jeep crash on July 4, 1945. The War Department refused to provide funds for their funerals. So the battalion pooled its own money and buried their sisters in the Normandy American Cemetery. They faced the enemy. They faced discrimination. And they never stopped serving. In October 1945, the battalion was sent to Paris. But by then, the war was over. The women were gradually discharged and sent home. In March 1946, the 688 was officially disbanded at Fort Dix, New Jersey. There was no parade, no ceremony, no recognition. The women went home to a country that didn't acknowledge what they'd done. And history forgot them. For decades, the story of the 688 was buried. It wasn't in the history books. It wasn't taught in schools. It was erased, but not entirely. In 1981, many of the surviving members returned to England and France, where they were honored for their wartime service. In 2018, a monument was dedicated to them at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In 2019, the Army awarded the unit the Meritorious Unit Commendation. And in 2022, President Joe Biden signed the 688 Congressional Gold Medal Act. The unit received America's highest civilian honor, 75 years after they came home to nothing. One of the last surviving members was Anna Mae Robertson. She was 98 years old when the Congressional Gold Medal was announced. She'd served in the battalion as a young woman, but her own family didn't even know the full extent of her story. When she was finally recognized, she received several standing ovations. The women of the 688 were unsung heroes. They faced racism. They faced sexism. They faced a war-torn continent with nothing but their determination and a motto: no male, low morale. 855 women. 17 million letters. 90 days. And a legacy that was buried for 75 years. They didn't just clear the mail. They changed history. This is Lost Timeline.